All right, I'm going, before I share the screen, I am recording. Before I share the screen, I'm going to try to show y'all this. Do y'all see what I'm holding? Dawn already knows because I told her. All right, that's right. It's a loofah sponge. Now that's sort of like a bridging the gap between what we're just finished on anatomy and talking about the anatomy, the details of the reproductive structures. But I'm going to, what this is nothing but a bunch of vascular bundles, a bunch of veins. All right, now, if we do the crop, one of the focuses of, I told you that we're going to talk about is the concept of a carpel, C-A-R-P-E-L. I'm looking at the cross section of it here, and this is related to cucumber, loofah sponges. Cucumber we'd be seeing 3 of these little cavities, but I'm seeing 4 here. And let me see if I can put my pen on the placenta. This is the placenta right here, and this is the placenta right here. That's where the seeds would have been. And the placenta is where the vascular supply goes out and feeds the little babies, the seeds. So this is, in fact, the placenta is like the placenta of a human, but not, it's analogous to it, not evolutionarily, not homologous. So it functions like a placenta. And the cavities are the parts of this is a 4-parted fruit. Cucumber's a 3-parted fruit. But anyway, so that's, I thought that was interesting. It sort of bridges the gap between what we talked about and what we're talking about now. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Let's see. Oops, I think I am. Okay, there we go. By the way, these 2 slides right here, the first 2, get repeated toward the end of your slide set. And Donna knows this. I talked about it with her yesterday. I don't know why that happened, but they are. So I think they're actually on the same page of your slide set. And so where you, so ignore them when we get there or throw it away, whatever, but they get repeated toward the end of the slide set. We may not even get that far. But now let's start here. Let's see if I can make this a little smaller. Thought I could, well, maybe not. Let's hide the thumbnail video. I'm going to try hiding the thumbnail video. Okay, that way I don't even see myself, but I'm assuming y'all can still see everything. I'm going to go ahead and I've decided that I'm better off using this than trying to use what I was using, and see if I can move this out of the way a little bit. Yeah, that helps. All right, now. I said that in the way of homework that I didn't really give you homework, but I said we're going to sporophyll, S-P-O-R-O-P-H-Y-L-L is a term we're going to wrestle with. We're going to wrestle with the term pistil and carpel, those terms, and compare and contrast them. Phyll, P-H-Y-L-L, means leaf, and spore means sporophyll. It means a spore-bearing leaf. And the spores are located in a little sac called the sporangiums. So it's a sporophyll is a leaf that's fertile. It's not sterile. It has spores in it. And even seed plants, we're going to find out, maybe not today, but we're going to find out, we're going to make it clear eventually before it's over, maybe down as far as Roman numeral 8 is concerned, the plant reproduction, that even seed plants have spores. Now, flowers and fruits are compound organs. That means they're made up of leaves and stems. And the leaves are modified. Now, this is the definition of a, whoops, I'm having that trouble here. Okay, now I got it. A flower is a modified determinate shoot. Another shoot's a stem. Bearing whorls, that's a cluster all the way around the node, whorls of sporophylls, either stamens and or carpels type sporophylls, with very short internodes with or without outer modified leaves, the perianth. Now that's a mouthful. In fact, it's almost a brainful. That's a lot. But a flower, and by the way, I've watched myself on the earlier videos when I was sick, and I can tell a difference, and I'm doing better now than I was. And so I'm almost, it's like night and day in terms of how I feel and respiratorily and stuff like that, because I'm through with my winter malady. But anyhow, I bet you never thought of the flower as that complicated. And if nothing else today, you're going to have a whole new idea of what a flower is and is not. And a flower doesn't have to have petals. A sporophyll is a fertile. I already said that. Okay. Now, some sporophylls are technically no longer sporophylls, and that means like the stamens and the sepals and the petals. And collectively, in a moment, we're going to mention the fact that that's the perianth. They are thought to have lost their sporangia and function in other ways now. And essential versus accessory sporophylls. Yeah, they're considered accessory sporophylls. The ones with the stamens and the pistils or carpels are considered essential. Now, boy, this thing is still real sensitive, and it's not winter anymore. Well, it is. Last night it was in the 30s here. So let's see if I've covered everything before I leave this slide. Okay, one thing I haven't said, and we're going to get to it pretty soon, is a cone of a gymnosperm, like a conifer or a cycad, is essentially the same definition as that of a flower, except the internodes are not as short, as I'm going to show you. In fact, let me do that now. All right, let me do the female first. All right, this is a section or slice, I hope you can see that, through a cone of a pine cone. And there's a stem, part of the definition. It said a flower is a modified determinate stem or shoot bearing whorls. Now this is two-dimensional because it's a section, cut, longitudinal section. And you have to think 3D. What you see on the right and what you see on the left is really going all the way around, except this is a longitudinal section, high diddle diddle through the middle of a female cone. And these, you might recognize these are the wings on a pine seed. Okay, these are the wings on a pine seed. Some of them are through the middle and you can see the whole wing, and others are not. But what you're looking at down here is a seed, okay, or the ovule that becomes a seed. Now that is the female cone. This is the male cone. Concept is similar, except the sac or the spore-bearing sac is underneath the sporophyll, whereas on this one, the sporophyll comes underneath what would be the sporangium, which is here. So anyway, think about this. I said with very short internodes. Okay. Here is a node, here's the internode, node, internode, node, internode. And a flower, it's even more compact than that, more compact than that. So let's get to, in fact, let me jump on ahead of myself. In a flower like this one, all right. Oh crap, this is showing. I thought I got rid of that. All right, okay, now. This shows that very internodes and very short internodes, even tighter, more clustered than the cone we just dealt with. All right, so we'll come back to that. I'm jumping around a little bit, but go back to, okay, to here. We're actually ready to proceed now. Any questions? we'll better visualize the perianth in the next few slides. Now, unlike okay, now, and almost think that sometimes it's not a good idea to make this comparison, because this structure from a magnolia looks like a cone. Over here is a true cone from a spruce, and they're not. This is not a true cone. It's technically, it's not a real cone, but it's an aggregate. We'll get into what an aggregate is late this time or early next time. But a follicle is a simple kind of fruit. It opens kind of like a purse, and here's one that's opened up. Kind of splayed open. Here's a good example, and the seed's laying in there. And this red structure on it is called an aril, A-R-I-L. It's just it's an outgrowth of the seed that attracts things like birds. But anyway, so that's a follicle. It sort of opens. Think of two hands clasped together and opening them up on the top, like you would catch water in your hands, and that's a follicle. In fact, what you're looking at here is this curlicue is the tip of the stigma where the pollen landed, and it grew down through here and fertilized the egg inside of that. But so an aggregate is a agglomeration of lots of pistils to fuse together. In fact, if you look down here, you see the scars of where the stamens fell off, and actually even the petals, or what we call them in this case, tepals, because you can't tell sepals from petals very well, fell off. So, but anyway, and to visualize this cone over here, you'd have to make it look like what I showed you a moment ago, you'd have to turn it upside down, or you turn it where it's like a fir. A fir, the cones point up, and a spruce, the cones point down. So if this was a fir, it would be easier to visualize in terms of what I showed you a few minutes ago. But seeds are naked on the inner surface of megasporophylls, and that's what this has. In the case of an angiosperm, we'll revisit this, but the megasporangium, which is here with the seeds inside, are actually enclosed within a leaf that totally encloses, like an apple. You're eating a modified leaf when you eat the fruit, or a pear, you're eating a modified leaf. And inside the core of that apple or pear is the seeds. And in the case of a gymnosperm, gymno means naked. So go to the gym, what do? In the shower, you get naked. So, but anyway, so these seeds are sitting on the surface naked, exposed. And these look exposed here, but you got to realize the megasporophyll is opened up. So this is not a cone. And the fact that these seeds are now exposed at maturity is irrelevant. These seeds are never really exposed until this thing breaks open. All right, let's see. Let's see if I've covered everything here. I want to before I leave this slide. Okay, I said that to make sense of the one on the left, you'd have to turn it upside down, turn it okay. All right, I think I've covered everything. Now, all right, we're going to spend a few minutes on this just to go over some terms. And this, the handout I sent this morning is, and Amy, I can't remember I think you were in the, you were in the Astra workshop. You got that handout already. And Steve did too, and Donna did too, and Rana too. But I sent an inflorescence handout this morning where the emphasis was on telling the peduncle from the pedicel. And the pedicel is the flower stalk of a single flower in an inflorescence. And then when you have, in this case, it's the peduncle too, because the inflorescence is considered simple in that there's only one flower in it. So in this case, the pedicel is the peduncle. They're one and the same. But if this was a flower cluster, it would be the peduncle, and the individual stalks would be pedicels. So that's a very confusing concept when you try to learn. But that's they're the stalk of the flower or the inflorescence, peduncle and pedicel. And the receptacle is where, and it's better seen on this slide here. Let's see, I'm jumping. Receptacle is where everything is inserted, all the whorls, the sepals, the petals, the stamens, and the whorl of inner ones called the carpels, or that's where they're inserted. So that's the definition of receptacle. If it had a matching, it would be matched up with, receptacle would be the place where the whorls, W-H-O-R-L-S, the whorls of sporophylls are inserted at the base of the flower. Now, what's bad about this diagram is that if you were, is that these filaments actually, the veins in them extend all the way down here. And you can't really appreciate that without me telling you. But in fact, the veins of the sepals extend through here. The veins of the petals extend through here. All of the vasculature extends down into this cup. And that's not obvious on this diagram. Now, this diagram is intended to be a simple, and it's so simple it's confusing because it's got one seed. Now, let's deal with the terms as we go up. Ovule. An ovule is what will become the seed. An ovule is an immature seed. After fertilization, an ovule becomes a seed. And the ovary, which is all this bowling pin thing, actually the base of the bowling pin, the ovary becomes the fruit. So after fertilization, the ovule becomes a seed, the ovary becomes the fruit. I'll repeat that at least once again later. Now, the calyx, well, I'm doing these backwards here. The calyx is the collective term for all of the sepals. Just like the corolla is a collective term for all of the whorl of petals, if they're there. And we'll talk about in a moment that neither of them may even be there. And the perianth is the collective term for both of those. For all of the sterile whorls of sporophylls, the sporophylls that no longer contain any spores, and the spores in the stamen are located here. The spores in the female are located here. I think I'm about ready. So the stamen is a microsporophyll and the pistil is a megasporophyll. And we'll revisit that too. But now let's focus on this one. Oh, let me go back. When we get to Roman numeral 8, the reproduction, we'll deal with this part. Okay, that's what's inside of here. And this whole, it begins, when we get to Roman numeral 8, which will be in April sometime, well, I think, well, maybe at this rate. The beauty of this class is we don't have to have a timeline because we're not working towards some exam. But there's the egg inside that gets fertilized. These two polar nuclei get hit by the other sperm that's in the pollen tube, and we have double fertilization in angiosperm, something we don't have in conifers or gymnosperms. And that gives them an advantage. Okay, but that's for the future. Now, let's have any questions on these terms. Again, the stamen is the same as a microsporophyll. The pistil is the same as a megasporophyll. Those are synonyms. Now, in this one, I already dealt with the perianth, okay? Now, the advantage of this illustration is that you can see a longitudinal section of the ovary again, but this time it's more typical in the fact that because there's lots of ovules instead of one. In fact, this is not a lot different than that that lava sponge I showed you, except there's only one placenta. It's in the center. okay? And if we looked at it from cross section, we don't even know how many carpels it is, but this drawing, it looks like there's only two, right, left and right. But anyway, all right, now let's go to this term pistil. I'm going to try to distinguish between pistil and carpel. Pistil comes from the term pestle, P-E-S-T-L-E, pestle, Latin. So pistil is Latin for pestle, like the mortar and pestle that pharmacists used to use, and I guess maybe in compound pharmacies maybe still use. All right, and I like to think of it as a bowling pin. It's very much like a bowling pin. Trouble is, you don't know inside of it if it's made up of one modified leaf, or in this case made up of more than one modified leaf. Now that's going to fog you up a little bit. We'll get, as we get to the lemon part of the citrus part of this slide set, I think it'll become a little more obvious here. I've got something on the screen. I don't know, maybe it's on the slide. Anyway, all right, let's see. All right. Let's see. Okay, the receptacle, we already dealt with that. That's the part where all of the sporophylls are inserted. And the last click was on the carpel. And by the way, carpel, that it's easier for beginners to understand what a pistil is because it looks like a bowling pin, but the term carpel is the more accurate term. Carp, C-A-R-P, stands for, well, the digits of your hand, the digits is spelled C-A-R-P-A-L, but here it's spelled C-A-R-P-E-L. If you look up the word, it means, refers to your hand, but it also refers to fruit. And that's the case it's used here. It's spelled C-A-R-P-E-L. And so a carpel may look like a pistil from the outside, and we'll get to that, so be patient. But a compound pistil is made up of more than one modified leaf. So a carpel is a modified leaf. So I said a moment ago that a pistil is another name for a megasporophyll, but better yet, a carpel is the better term. Okay, an ovary versus ovulary. All right, I got this here to make you realize that when I mentioned placenta, that it's not like a human placenta, but it functions that way. Well, an ovary on a human female or an animal is not the same as an ovary of a plant. So technically the more accurate term would be ovulary, but nobody ever says that. We just use the term ovary with the understanding it's not anatomically exactly the same thing, but functionally it is. An ovary of in fact, even down to an umbilical-like cord structure that we could have, or do have. Okay, and this, by the way, is that what I talked about with the pedicel peduncle business before. All right, now I like this diagram a lot because it shows when we look at these other diagrams just before that we just finished, and we use the term whorl, W-H-O-R-L, the inner, when you have one of these in the center, it doesn't look like a whorl. But this is a more primitive looking angiosperm flower that shows that the inner W-H-O-R-L, the inner whorl, is indeed a whorl. And there's a tendency to get reduced down to one, which is what we've been seeing. But the primitive angiosperms have more of this, or we believe even some extinct ones had this configuration where you have a whorl of sepals, a whorl of petals, a whorl of stamens, and even a whorl of carpels. Now, I've stuck the word gynoecium and androecium on the slide yesterday as I was looking these over. So you might want to modify your slides. I'm glad I sent them at 2 slides per page, because otherwise they'd be lost, I think, some of this. I'm having this is a 3-cup coffee day instead of a 2. So anyhow, All right, before we leave this slide, what did I say the collective term for the calyx, for the sepals was? The calyx. The collective term for the petals is corolla. Well, the collective term for the stamens is the andrecium. And the collective term for all of the carpels, the whorl of carpels, is the gynecium. And this is a diphthong, which means the O is silent. So it's not gynoecium, it's gynecium. And this is andrecium, not androecium. The first vowel is silent. All right, now, I think we got that. All right, now, complete versus incomplete flowers. Complete flowers have all whorls of sporophylls, all 4 of them, like the preceding slide. Incomplete flowers lack any one of those whorls. Could lack sepals, could lack petals, could lack the andrecium, or lack the gynecium. Now, apetal examples are apetalous or asepalous flowers, or both. When both are missing, it means the flower lacks a perianth. Well, that makes sense. All right. And then imperfect flowers, such as staminate or pistillate flowers, see the next slide, are by definition also incomplete because they lack at least one of the whorls. Now, okay, apetalous or asepalous is like saying aseptic. It means without infection. A means without sepals, without petals, or without sepals. Now, so like any one of the, so that fits the definition of incomplete. Imperfect flowers are by definition automatically incomplete. But you can be incomplete and have no sepals or petals and still be perfect. All right, now let's talk about the sexuality of flowers, and then the next slide I'll be talking about the sexuality of the plant. Now, this is a perfect flower and a complete flower. It's got sepals, petals, stamens, and a pistil in the middle. All right, and so it is the norm, really. The more common flower would have all of this, all these parts. So it's not only complete, it's perfect. But we have imperfect flowers over here that have sepals and petals. This one has stamens only, and this one has pistils only, and it lacks one of the sexes. Therefore, it's by definition imperfect. All right, to use a term from animals, this over here is hermaphroditic. It's like an earthworm. It has both parts. But in most of the animals we're familiar with, they're separate sexed, and that's what these flowers are, separate sexed. Now, what happens in the next slide, we start talking about sexuality of plants. Now, all right, plant sex. If all the flowers on the plant are perfect or bisexual, then we said it's, like I just said, hermaphroditic. The term that we use is synoecious, not illustrated here. Well, here it is. This is a synoecious flower, a synoecious plant that has perfect flowers. All right, so that synoecious is not illustrated on this page, on this slide, but it is illustrated on the previous one. What is illustrated on here are the 2 other conditions of sexuality in a plant. What happens if all the flowers are unisexual? Well, I shouldn't say all, because if on the plant some of the flowers are unisexual, that means they have either stamens or pistils and they're on the same plant, like oak trees. Oak trees are good examples of monoecious plants, and so are birches, because you have the little catkins of the males and females that are separate on the same different branches. But in hollies, the flowers are unisexual on different plants. You have a berry plant that has fruit on it, and you have a plant that has pollen or stamens on it. And the truth is, in some of these plants are polygamo-dioecious, meaning they'll have some male and female flat on the same, and then they have some perfect ones too. But that's don't go there right now. But generally speaking, people get dismayed by, oh, my holly doesn't have berries. That's because you've got a boy, you got a male. And there's no way that I know of that you could tell without looking at the sex chromosomes. In nature, in the tropics is where we find dioecious conditions here. But in fact, all the cycads we'll talk about in a minute, they're all dioecious. Every living cycad is dioecious. And all the extinct ones are too, we think. But I'm going to read a little bit passage from a tropical site. 14% of 566 species in a tropical forest were determined to be dioecious, 14%. I've heard as low as 7, so in the tropics. But if you look at the woody component only, the 35% among the woody plants, the dominant woody plants, up to 35% are dioecious. Now, what's all that mean ecologically? That means that if you're looking for a mate, you might have a problem. And unlike we look at a temperate forest, we see repetition of trees, lots of them. In a tropical forest, you might have the next member of the species is a mile away. So it gets pretty dicey when you start having this kind of condition in the tropics. And that's where insect pollination is very important. Okay, so that's tying a little ecology with this. All right. And sometimes the trees that have that also have a vegetative, asexual way of reproducing too as a backup. Any questions? These are fairly difficult concepts, but trying to indicate flower sex on one hand is, we're talking about the flowers, but when you start talking about plants, you use these terms. Synoecious, having perfect flowers on the same plant, and then there's monoecious and dioecious. Before we leave this, think of this as one house with 2 bedrooms. Like an oak tree has different branches, would be different bedrooms of the house. Whereas these are 2 houses, dioecious. Di means 2. Ecious means house, I think. Now, here we have, that's a glass model, and this is a glass model. If you ever get a chance to go to the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, you should. That's where these pictures came from. I used to have some of my labs at the museum that was so useful when I taught up in the Midwest. But anyway, this is a sectional model view through frangipani flower. Sepals are there, petals are there, stamens are there, overarching the female inside here. This is the pistil or the fused carpels of a frangipani. So it's a complete perfect flower. Over on the right, we have, you may not know pachysandra, but you've probably heard of boxwood shrubs, and this is in the same family. And so we have, what would you call these? Well, you might call them sepals, but what they'll tend to do is just call them bracts because they're not in a definite whorl. And just say that there's no sepals and no petals. And these are the these are the pistillate flowers, and these are the staminate flowers, okay? So they're imperfect, and by definition, once they're imperfect, automatically are incomplete. They're lacking one or more of the whorls. So you wouldn't expect something like this to be insect pollinated. At least there's nothing much attractive about them. In fact, they're pretty small. I could go out in my front and get something looking very similar off of my boxwoods, which are in the same family, the Buxaceae, boxwood family. Now, this is the largest flower in the world. This particular specimen may not be because there's somebody's hand. I think it can be close to 3 feet across, but Rafflesia is a root parasite in Borneo, and there's not even any green parts because the plant relies on the roots of trees it lives on. And this thing, they say, I've never smelled it, but they say you can smell it for a long ways off because these are fly pollinated, and this color is like flesh, rotting flesh, and it smells like rotting flesh. And the flies just get attracted and do the pollination based on that. So it's ironic the largest flower in the world is a parasite. So, but it's a complete flower too. Now cotton over here this is a model just like that one. You can't see the sepals very well in this diagram, but this has, in addition to being a complete flower, there's also another whorl of structures that we refer to as bracts. All right, now bract is a leaf-like structure that is associated with a flower. It may be colorful and it may not be. In this case, it's not. And let's see. Well, I thought I had. Okay, I guess it's on an upcoming slide. We'll revisit the concept on an upcoming slide. But right now, this is more. This is the different types of different types of flowers. Plants on the oak. On the oak, we have what's starting. If it's not already, it is down here. We'll soon have these little tassels falling onto your cars, and they're loaded with pollen. Every tassel has, sometimes 25 or more flowers in it. And there's a glass model showing the individual flowers that have some sepals or petals. I'm not sure which. We'll talk about that in a minute. But so one of these is like one of these from this tassel. And there's what an individual looks like right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stamens in this staminate flower. The pistillate flower of oak is a little less obvious, and they're hard to find. Sometimes you have to dig around. This is the pistillate model of a pistillate flower from, I think it's bur oak. And this is like the myrtle oak that's growing in my yard that I planted as a hedge. It's another story. But anyway, we've got little 3 carpellate flowers here, the pretty bare bones, down to sex only, nothing attractive much at all about this. That's why they're wind pollinated. The pollen will blow from here to another branch that has this, hopefully not on the same tree, but to another tree. So it will cross-pollinate, which will lead to cross-fertilization. All right, now at maturity, this flower becomes this fruit. And 2 of these there's 3 chambers here, 2 of them abort and 1 remains. And so that's what you get here. You get an acorn, and the scales have metamorphosized, changed a little bit. They're bracts, or like woody bracts. And that's what the hull of an acorn is woody bracts. All right, so that's the monoecious example. Now, switching to the maple family. Now, this is sort of an anomaly to me because when you try to learn genera and families of flowering plants, you usually look for the reproductive structures to help you, not the leaves. The leaves usually look quite different, but the flowers there's something in common. Well, in the maple family, it's not so. In the maple family, the leaves look like maple leaves. Of course, everything with a maple leaf is not a maple. Viburnum, some of them have maple-like leaves, and they're not maples. But for example, the sugar maple has a flower that's not only incomplete, but it's imperfect. You have pistillate and staminate ones on different branches, actually the same flower cluster. So, but yet something like this non-native Norway maple over here has perfect actinomorphic symmetry flowers, whereas these are bilaterally symmetrical, at least the females are. And so what I'm trying to say is that you would never expect that to be in the same genus with that, but they are. But normally in flowering plants, the flowers would look more alike than the leaves would, give you better hints of relationship than the leaves would. the reproductive structures tell more of the story than the vegetative structures normally, but maples are an exception. Now, poplars, which is what this is in Pennsylvania in February, are dioecious, just like willows, they're relatives. And so you have these clusters of catkins, that is a catkin, clusters of pistils on one tree, and you have staminate ones on the other tree. I had some dirt on the slide here. I couldn't get it off, but this was what happened when I scanned a picture I took in the 70s. Anyhow, so this is an example of a dioecious condition. The plants are dioecious, and there's only pistils in here. And so you're relying on wind to get the pollen over to these ends of these little, the tips is where they'll land on the ends of these stigmas. Now, I can see that we're running long on time, so not surprised. This is a very difficult concept. I kind of tried to tell you that spore-filled concept and carpel concepts are difficult. And carpel we really haven't elaborated on yet. We will. Maybe not today. We'll see. This is all the more reason to have 2 slides per page, because otherwise you'd never see it. But this is an attempt to classify in some sort of dichotomous fashion the different summary slide or different flower types. Accessory parts, you're talking stamens and, sepals and petals, and then you got bracts that you may or may not have. And we'll get into that on the upcoming slides. I said we'd revisit bracts, and we are. And then the essential parts, you're talking stamens and pistils and perfect flowers. But incomplete flowers, this is the situation you can have. Monoecious species like oaks, dioecious species like willows and hollies. Okay. But this is a slide that you could kind of study later because that's the way that you could divide them up. You could, if you chose to do so, complete, incomplete, and then we start looking at whether or not their accessory parts are present or not. All right, now, bracts don't need to be colored, but these are. Actually, not all of them. Down here, the mallow family is known for having bracts that are green. In fact, the term is often used epicalyx in the mallow family, E-P-I-C-A-L-Y-X, and that means upon the calyx. So you can see the calyx here, the sepals, but then there's a whirl of green structures below it that they're called bracts. So if you have both, you have bracts and sepals, and that's what you have here. But in dogwood, the bracts are surrounding a cluster of flowers. This stupidly called this flowering dogwood, implying that these aren't flowers when they really are. But there's some dogwoods don't have these, and some do. In the euphorbia family, this is what this is poinsettia. The bracts are colorful red in some cases. Sometimes they're not that color. And the individual flowers are here. Some of them, these are female, and these are see, I don't even see the males hardly. Yeah, they're tiny. But all right, now, in the sunflower workshop or the aster workshop we had, we showed this slide, and it's Richard Ware's slide. It shows that when you have a cluster of bracts, a whorl of bracts, we call it an involucre in the aster family. Actually, you could call it an involucre in the case of non-aster families too, when you had a cluster of bracts like that. This would qualify as an involucre by definition. Now, this is more on bracts. Let's deal with the simpler situation first. Both of these are in the buttercup family. The buttercup family can have a situation when there are no petals. In this windflower genus, anemone, you have these are sepals. There are no petals. In the case of clematis, there are, I think this is probably crispa, clematis crispa, don't quote me. There are no petals. Now, how do you tell, if there's one whorl only, how do you tell what they are? Anatomically, if you did a section, sepals usually have 3 bundles, 3 veins, whereas petals are down to 1. That's how you would tell. But it's not always easy to tell which whorl is missing, because sepals can be colorful like you see here. And then you see the same here. 4 o'clock family is known for having no petals. And the 4 o'clock, in fact, I have a 4 o'clock growing outside, and I don't have it here in the presentation, but the what you call the flower or the 4 o'clock, the would-be petals are really sepals. They look a lot like these on bougainvillea, the vine, the tropical vine. There are no petals, and these are the sepals, and these red or pink things are bracts. So there are attractants, but they're not in the form of petals. Now, this next slide, actually, that slide that I just showed you, when I gave this presentation to Linda Chafin's certification class, she cut it out, wouldn't let me show it. Said you got to cut, so I had to cut this out, and I had to cut this out too. So I didn't have to cut anything out of this because we don't have a time limit. And I think this was a little too much evolution for Linda, or at least she didn't think the students needed to hear that in her certification class. But what this does more than anything is tries to show you that a stamen is a modified leaf. This on the left is a very primitive situation, Degnaria on the left, to the more typical situation that we were used to seeing on the right, with a filament and an anther. In this case, the filament is the leaf blade, and the anthers are stuck up there on the top. So, and there's a transition all the way over to this that we could demonstrate evolutionarily. And sometimes we'd have to look at extinct plants to do that. But the anthers are on this whole thing is a microsporophyll, and this is the filament, this is the anther, and the same is true over here. So anyway, that shows some magnolia won't quite show this, but it'll be the stamen on a magnolia is fairly primitive, but not this primitive. Now, another primitive angiosperm is water lily, nymphia. And this upper left is showing, well, here's where the term, let me introduce the term tepals. In magnolia and other primitive angiosperms like water lilies, we use the term tepals when we have a trouble distinguishing between the sepals and the petals. They intergrade. Tepal is a term that's used when the sepals and petals are not clearly distinguishable, as they are here and again in the magnolia family. Other primitive angiosperms have this arrangement too. Here we have the removed floral parts. Note the green on this one a little bit. And we get a transition from the sepal-like structures to a petal-like structure all the way down to the stamens. And this stamen that has no filament at the far right. It's just almost totally anther. And then down here, we have a close-up of stamens showing the gradation from the outer, this is all in the same flower, by the way, from the outer laminar stamens to the filamentous stamens on the right. They're more typical. And that looks a lot like that. So, in other words, this looks leaf-like, and that's how we know that stamens are really modified leaves. Carpels, not carpels, stamens. Now, speaking of carpels, that's what this is about. It's hard to understand the concept of sporophyll, let alone megasporophyll, but megasporophyll is the one that contains the seed. And The enclosure of a seed within the ovary, a distinguishing feature of flowering plants, angiosperms, probably evolved from a seed-bearing leaf that became rolled into a tube. And in this case, up here, the rolling over of the leaf is perpendicular to the long axis. I showed you this diagram earlier, my little hand drawings. And in this case, this angiosperm, the rolling over of the leaf is parallel to the long axis. Okay, and so the megasporangia are marginal on the leaf, and when it rolls over, you get this appearance. And this is not a lot different than that starting prop I showed you, the lopha sponge. Not a lot different. Okay. Now this is. I don't think it actually even occurs in Georgia. I think this is another, this is another slide Linda wouldn't let me show you, show the class. This is marsh marigold, but again, I don't think it's in Georgia, but it does illustrate very much like these are the carpels of marsh marigold in the buttercup family, showing you can even see the veins. And in fact, you can see this is the placenta. And these little stalks are the umbilical cords we call a funiculus. And so these little seeds, they were called ovules before they were fertilized, are now seeds. And they're laying on this fruit that's now opened up because it was enclosed like you see here before. So in a cross section, that looks a lot like that, you see. I hope I'm making sense here, and because this is pretty heavy stuff. Down here at the bottom, we have a member of the stonecrop family, Crassula, that shows a whorl of carpels that are configured in a whorl stamens, a whorl sepals, or petals and sepals, and actually an accessory structure here called a nectary that's not always there. Okay. Now, one of my favorite slides is cycads. I really like cycads. Back in the 70s, we knew that there was 100 species of extant living cycads. Today, there's as many as 300 species known. Most of those are rare, and with most of them being extinct. Cycads and conifers were prominent during the age of the dinosaurs. And today we live in the age of mammals, which is and birds, and it's also the age when the plants of angiosperms. So the dinosaurs and the gymnosperms were common back then in the Mesozoic. The Cenozoic, it's the age of angiosperms and mammals and birds. Now, okay. Up until this point, if you haven't understood what a sporophyll is, look at this. This is the megasporophyll of cycas. The female, if we looked inside of this one, we would find these. The male separate plant has these 2-foot long cones that have structures that look like more like, well, these have stamens only, pollen only. It's pollen, and these don't hang around like typical males. They don't hang around very long. It's not good for much, but anyhow, they have pollen, and whereas these have separate plants have the ovules, that some of which become seeds, and sometimes it's ants, the pollinators, but it's still not known how the pollen gets from this plant to this other plant. And I told you once already about this cycad that's only existing in nature and cultivation because it's a male and there's none of the females around. And that's kind of like what has in some birds. But now take a look at this. This is what is a sporophyll? Modified leaf. Well, that looks like a modified leaf. So does that. But that sure doesn't. But what you got to look at is the transition as we go across. A little less leaf-like, a little less leaf-like, a little less leaf-like, and totally unleaf-like. Now, I've got Zamia in my yard out there, that's what it looks like. In fact, what I'm trying to say is in some cycads, the female cone has sporophylls that look like the male, not like that. Okay, so all cycads are dioecious, and that's what you have here. All right, this slide is almost out of place. I'm wondering why it's here, but I guess it was my attempt not to forget talking about floral morphology, not to forget about talking about symmetry. Actino means radial, and that's what you got here. You have radial symmetry, regular symmetry, actinomorphic symmetry, all meaning the same thing. That's the more common type. The more highly evolved flowers have irregular bilateral symmetry, are also known as zygomorphic. Zygo means yolk, and I don't know how to translate what the sense of that, but this actino means radial, and that makes sense. It's like spokes, but I don't get the yolk analogy here. But anyway, this rosemary that's on the sandhill down here has a bilaterally symmetrical flower, typical of the mint family. Orchids have this bilateral symmetry, and the African violets, okay, this is not a true violet. I've got in my living room some at least 50-year-old African violets that were in a house in Chicago when I bought it in '83. And so that even though it's not a woody plant, they persist. And the flowers are bilaterally symmetrical, and that's what you have here. And by that I mean you can only cut it one place and get equal parts. You cut it 90 degrees of that and you won't get equal parts. So a radially symmetrical flower, you have infinite number of cuts you can make. And that's the symmetry. When it comes to morphology of the symmetry of the flower, that's what this is all about. Now we'll go about at least 5, maybe 10 more minutes, but because this is the part that if anything gets repeated, this will be it. This is a lemon flower, and what we're trying to do is still elaborate on the concept of what happens when the seed this egg gets fertilized, the ovary becomes the seed, and the ovary becomes the fruit. That's what this statement, ovary becomes a fruit as the ovary becomes a seed. Now, the ovary protects and nourishes the enclosed seeds, and that's what's going on here. The problem with this is that bowling pin, you don't know that inside there's a bunch of wedges, like the wedges of a lemon. So that bowling pin there looks like a regular bowling pin that has only one seed inside, or one modified leaf. We'll get now. The next slide should clear it up a little bit, but before we go there, let's, all right, we've got 3 carpels that are distinct and 3 separate pistils. And that could be very much like what you saw. Let's back it up here, except you got 5. In stonecrop, you got 5, and here we got 3. Some members of the stonecrop family have their fused down here at the base. But this one is fused at the base to the point that they're not separate pistils anymore. They're 3 carpels that are fused. Now, so think of, okay, the only difference here is you got 1 stigma and 1 style. Here you got separate stigmas and styles. And so think of this as the wedges of an orange or citrus or lemon. And here we've got, instead of having 3, we've got 2. All right. Here's a stigma style ovary and 1 bowling pin. Here we got a bowling pin over here, but if you section it, it's not 1 modified leaf. It's at least 2. So what I'm saying is this is a simple pistil. This is a compound pistil. This is a pistil made up of 1 modified leaf or 1 carpel. This is a pistil on the outside, but it's really made up of at least 2 in this drawing, carpels. Okay, so what you see on the outside is not what you see on the inside. So the answer to this question is this one is a simple pistil. All the rest are comprised of more than 1 modified leaf, and therefore all of these are compound pistils. better. Now, this is the place I think where you find the slides you're going to have to throw away that got repeated by mistake. Okay. And those two people that aren't here, if we do this again, are going to be confused about that, but I'll have to try to explain it. But okay, here is a lemon, and here's a mature lemon. Here's a young lemon, mature lemon. You can see the remnants of the sepals down here. The petals are gone, but instead of the true lemon, or like the true orange, would have more than one section, more than one wedge. So what I'm really getting at, people, is the wedges that you eat in the citrus family are really modified leaves. It's hard to fathom, isn't it? But that's what's going on here. So there's 4 carpels and 4 cavities. The locule is a fancy word for cavity, which is really what you saw on the luffa sponge when I started out. Okay, and the placenta is right here in the center, and you don't see the individual seed stalks. Okay, I think we're at a good stopping point right here. Okay, because at this point, we're going to get to something that Donna and I were talking about yesterday. Is I think there's an expression, jinx show me a coat, when two people think of the same thing, but she thought of this at the same, not too different a time than I did. And as many times as I've done it, we're going to end it now, but if I'm going to deviate a moment on the two, I talked about the dictionary of botany. That's a good dictionary to have, and Donna just bought it, and you can still get it, I think, used. That's a good general dictionary of botany. But the other book that I talked about before is more for identification. It's called Plant Identification Terminology by Harris and Harris. It's a dictionary that's more gravitated toward identification of plants. Well, that's divided. That book is divided up into 2 parts. There's a general glossary, and then there's part 2, and it's divided up by fruit, flowers, leaf surfaces, hairs, that sort of thing. And in that second part of the book, if you're studying fruits, you would want to go to page, page 195 and start talking about Genesium. But page 203 and 204 of that book, is that you, Donna?
Yeah.
Page 203 and 203 and 204 is actually a dichotomous key to the fruits in Harris and Harris. It'll help you understand fruits better. And then the other difficult part of flower terminology is the inflorescences. And then that's on page 172 in that book. And the key to the flower types, inflorescence types, is page 175. What I'm trying to tell you is when it comes to flowers and fruits, there is no more difficult concept to grasp than the fruit types and the flower type, inflorescence types. They're very difficult to get a handle on. And the best way to get a handle on them is to go through a dichotomous key. So if you didn't get those page numbers, I can give them to you in an email again. But before we quit, which is now real close, I'll try to pick up here if I don't repeat much of what I did today. There's 3 basic fruit types. Actually, we could go ahead with this slide, and this shows everything on this page is simple, aggregate, multiple. Everything on this page is simple except for these 2. Aggregate fruits and multiple fruits. Synconium, fancy word for the fig. Mulberry is another example in the same family as fig, by the way. The astonishing thing is a strawberry or a blackberry is an aggregate fruit, but a lookalike mulberry is a multiple fruit. So you have a cluster of ovaries that are in the same flower. Here you have every ovary in a separate flower. Pineapple shows pretty well. Here's the flower of pineapple. Here's the fruit. All of these, you have these separate in a tight cluster are all part of that. That was one ovary and one separate flower, but in fruit they're fused together. Over here, in the blackberry or raspberry related to blackberry, these are like druplets, little ovaries in one flower. So we have one flower with many fruits. Here you have one flower per fruit. Well, you have many flowers per fruit. So here's the bottom line. This is a product of a flower cluster, a multiple. A multiple fruit is a product of a flower cluster. The aggregate fruit is a product of a single flower. And with that, we'll cut it off. Okay. We nearly finished the set, but let's see. We almost finished the set, which would end it right here. But that's the difficult part. And anyway, so okay, I'll back up. Stop the screen share. Okay. Are there any questions before we leave? You might go while the iron's hot. Okay. All right. So, all right.
Lots
so
of terms.
Let's see if there's anybody. The chat here has, what's the chat say? From Steve, direct message. Later, you can share the cutaway slides of the pine cone. Yeah, Steve wants me to share the cutaway slides of the pine cone, and I'll just send those to all of you. And if you want them, you can keep them. If you don't, you won't. But anyway, yeah, that carpal concept is pretty far out to think that the fruit is a modified leaf when which it really is. And, but anyhow, all right. Well, I always look forward to these things. I don't know if it's so much because I like trying to convey a difficult topic, or I like hanging out with like-minded people, or both. But they're not. It's like the Marines. There are not many of you. So a few. All it takes is a few good people, right? All right. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Bobby.
Hope I survive next weekend. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.